going to formally introduce Andrew Spector and Jake Lerner. So I got to know Andrew and Jake when they were still Teach for America teachers in our public schools, and they had a passion for youth development. They saw the leadership potential in their students, and they also have a commitment to helping us as adults better engage with youth voice in our community. And so Jake and Andrew, as they finished up their Teach for America commitment, really had this vision for a program they called Tulsa Changemakers. It was the first time I'd ever heard that word, Changemakers. Now everybody's using it. But they came to Leadership Tulsa, and they've been operating under our fiscal sponsorship since their inception. And they have ramped programming up. They're meeting the needs of more and more students, and they are providing some really innovative adult training programs as well. So I asked them here today to give us all an update, and I'm going to put myself on mute and turn it over to Jake and Andrew. Thanks, guys.
Well, thank you so much, Wendy, for having us. Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Andrew Spector.
I'm Jake Lerner.
And we're the co-founders and program directors of Changemakers. And we're really excited today to share with you a little bit about where Changemakers started and where we're headed, and then do an activity and do some learning with you on authentic youth-adult partnership. So to kick us off, I want to open with a question. And that question is, when you were in 5th or 6th grade, if you could have changed one thing about your school or community, what would it have been? You can go ahead and unmute yourself to answer, or just put it in the chat. Answer the question, when you were in 5th or 6th grade, if you could have changed one thing about your school or community, what would it have been? See fewer clicks from Wendy, definitely. Mercedes agrees. Yeah, more inclusiveness, dealing with bullies.
I had an idea when I was in 5th grade about letting kids with good grades be able to get stuff at the book fair. I don't know if y'all remember book fairs, but they used to be real hype, and I did not always have the money for a book fair. So I was always like, well, if we do good in school, could we do something like that? So that was an idea that I always wanted to change.
Love that. They were super hype. Teachers who seemed more understanding, more involvement with city officials, smaller class sizes. Yeah, Mean Girls, a lot of inclusiveness and bullying, playground. Awesome. So the story of Changemakers is, oh, Wendy?
I just wanted to say one other thing I just thought of. No required gym class. That would have been great.
We haven't had that Changemaker project yet, but that definitely resonates with a lot of conversations I've had with people. So Tulsa Changemakers is an after-school youth leadership development and action program. And the program is really a product of 2 experiences that Jake and I had when we moved to Tulsa through Teach for America about 6 years ago now. Our first experience when we moved here was just first off feeling incredibly welcomed across the board, from nonprofits to business professionals to government officials to just people at our schools. Everybody seemed to be communicating to us in one way or another that we were valuable to the community. They wanted to connect us as much as possible, and they wanted to position us as leaders in the community. And then the second experience we had was going into our classrooms. So I was teaching 6th grade at Bell Elementary. Jake was teaching 5th grade at Tulsa Legacy Charter School. And of course, first year teaching was challenging, but we were also just like blown away by our students. They were bright, they were socially minded, they had leadership skills that rivaled adults that we knew. And we became really struck by the juxtaposition between our experiences as outsiders and newcomers to Tulsa, me moving here from Charleston, originally from outside of Boston, Jake moving here from Philly, feeling really welcomed, really positioned as leaders. And then that juxtaposing with the young people in our classrooms and them not receiving the same level of investment and positioning as leaders in their community as me and Jake. And what struck us the most about that is that the young people in our classrooms are actually better positioned to drive positive impact in their schools and communities than me and Jake. They have unique experiences and perspectives actually growing up and living in their communities that Jake and I don't have as outsiders and as newcomers to Tulsa. And so the idea of Changemakers became, what can we do? And as our mission statement says, empower promising youth leaders to drive positive impact in Tulsa right now and into the future. So what the program looks like right now, we do three main things. We have our after school program, we have alumni programming, and we do some training, consulting, and partnerships. So our after school program, we're currently at 23 schools. Our focus is Title I schools and TPS and Union. And what we do is we'll partner with a school site to hire, train, and support a coach who's typically a teacher at the school site. And then that coach is responsible for recruiting a new small team of students each semester and take that team of students through a process of something we call Listen, Listen, Act, where they ultimately launch a community impact project. So Listen, Listen, Act means that the Changemakers first listen to themselves, where they say, hey, I'm an expert in my school and in my community. What are the strengths, challenges, and opportunities that I see? The second listen is saying, hey, I'm an expert, but I know I don't represent everybody in my community, so I need to listen to others. And so they go out and they do a listening campaign through one-on-one interviews and surveys, and they talk with people we call super connectors. And then at the intersection of those two phases of listening, the Changemakers plan, execute, and measure a community impact project. And then ultimately they share about that community impact project at a public pitch night in front of over 200 people. This year, all our pitch nights have been virtual, but typically they're at the TCC McKeon Center for Creativity downtown. We actually had our first pitch night of this spring last night on Facebook Live, and I'll put the link in the chat later on, but we'll have 2 more pitch nights later this month on May 25th and 26th that you are all absolutely invited to. Now, after the Changemakers are involved in the after school program, we offer alumni programming to keep them engaged as well. So 2 of our main alumni programs are, one is our advisory committee, and our advisory committee provides strategic direction to the Changemakers organization, and then also has various subcommittees where the Changemakers can plan, execute, and measure alumni programs. So these are committees like Career in College, where they plan career in college events. We have one specifically for elementary students. We have a communications and branding and fundraising committee where they support with that work. The Changemakers from that committee were the ones that helped us redesign our logo as an example. And then lastly, but not least, is our training, consulting, and partnerships. And these are opportunities for us to train adults and how to facilitate authentic youth adult partnership, among other things that are sort of underlying philosophies of Changemakers, and then consult and partner with different organizations to really build what we're calling the infrastructure for youth voice in the city of Tulsa. So as a couple examples, we're actually currently partnering with the Tulsa Police Department to bring together some community engagement officers, some young people that have had experiences with law enforcement, some community partners and parent and guardians to review TPD's policies, practices, programs, and trainings that have to do with young people. So it's an intentional space that we've created where youth and adults can partner to do something in an organization that serves young people, to think how that can happen more effectively. As a couple more examples that are on the horizon for us, we're really excited about a partnership with the Ed Darby Foundation next fall, where we're going to be piloting a version of youth-led philanthropy, where a small team of students at Monroe Middle School will have the responsibility of $10,000, and they'll both be able to design and execute a philanthropic process. And so they may do it through a traditional grant-making model, but they'll have the decision not just where the money goes, but how that process is. And so there'll be full power over the funds and how it's affecting their school and community. And then another example of partnership is we're going to be launching an intergenerational community organizing initiative in partnership with Growing Together and the Lobeck Taylor Family Foundation in the Kenna Whittier neighborhood next fall as well. And so that's a really exciting opportunity to bring adults and young people together to build and apply skills in advocacy and organizing. And so in terms of where the Changemakers is going, we see ourselves growing in all these areas. So we're at 23 schools for the after school program this semester. We're expecting to be at 35 plus next year, growing to 45 plus in the following year. And this is all part of really increasing the saturation of the after school program in the city of Tulsa to achieve our big vision. And that big vision also is impacted by continuing to increase our alumni programming and the partnerships we create to support organizations that work with young people and building that infrastructure for youth voice. Just one last example of a training is we have a Teens on Board training that was actually an initiative of Youth Philanthropy Initiative. And that's where we support nonprofits in launching and sustaining youth advisory boards, or what we call youth action teams. And so this final slide shares our vision statement. This is all in service of our big vision, which is a future where Tulsa is a model city for youth-driven impact. The youth are core catalysts for impact in their communities, and communities are actively engaged in identifying, developing, and empowering youth as leaders. Tulsa is consistently cultivating highly effective community leaders eager to empower successive generations. So I'm sure after reading this vision statement, it becomes pretty clear why we came under Leadership Tulsa's umbrella in the first place. And you can see the connections between the opportunities and activities that the Changemakers go through as young people and how that can filter upwards into the Tulsa community afterwards as well. So I'll stop talking now and turn it over to Jake, who's going to share with you all a little bit about the underlying philosophy of Changemaker, and particularly around authentic youth adult partnership.
Thank you, Andrew. And thank you all for joining us this morning, and Wendy for the opportunity. I'm going to stop my screen share, and we wanted to use a little bit of our time. So we wanted to make sure everybody had the update, but we also want to use our time to share a specific tool. So we imagine some people on the call are looking for something they can take with them to help their organization further along with regards to effective youth adult partnership. So to that end, I'm going to share a document on my screen that we share with most of our coaches and all of our partners. And then I believe Wendy will be able to share a PDF in the chat so you can follow along on your own screen as well. Go ahead.
Jake, I do not know how to share. I've about 10 minutes. I was trying to figure that out. What I'll do is I'll email it out afterwards with the recording of this session.
Okay, thank you. So this is the Free Child Project Youth Voice Rubric. We call it the Ladder of Youth Voice, developed by Adam Fletcher and the Free Child Institute. But the insights here in terms of youth adult partnership have been building for a very long time. So we use this particular graphic because it's color coded and it's clear. But it has its origins in the organizing and education movements throughout history, Black Liberation Movement, Farm Workers Movement. And we think it's just very nicely distilled here. So we like to use this for our Changemaker coaches as well as our community partners. I'm going to give everybody a chance. I'm going to do my Star Wars scroll, and I'll give everybody a chance to read through it. But I wanted to first put it into some context as you're reading. This isn't something that we use. They're calling it a rubric. We call it a ladder. We don't use it to evaluate teachers like, oh, you're doing it wrong if you're lower on the ladder. We use it really as a jumping off point for conversations with coaches and organizations of, first of all, where do you want to be? Some programs might better be situated for youth as advisors, where others are going to want a completely youth-driven space or youth adult equity. So I want you to have that in mind before you read, and we're going to talk in more detail about that during our activity. So with that, I'm going to start at number 1, and I'll do I'm pretty sure it's Star Wars. I don't want to reveal my not knowledge of this, but I'm pretty sure it's the Star Wars movies that scroll real slow. Okay, so pay extra attention to the far left, but there's good stuff in every column.
As I'm reading this, it makes me think that any group you're trying to engage, you could also think about these same sort of layers.
Absolutely. So a few things I wanted to point out about this document, and then I'm really interested in hearing everybody's reflections. It's broken up into three major categories. Manipulation and tokenism is considered non-engagement. A partial engagement of young people would be as consultants, or there's an adult decision to be made, but we're using youth to inform it. And again, I don't want to say that that's always the wrong answer. Sometimes there is an adult decision to be made, and it would be more helpful to incorporate youth in it. And then full engagement of youth. There's kind of three. This graphic in particular breaks it into three categories. There's youth adult equality, which is a split of responsibilities, not really active collaboration, but adults take this section of things, youth take this section of things. There's completely youth driven spaces. And then there's youth adult equity, which is impact and ownership of shared outcomes. And I wanted to offer a question to the group. You can unmute yourself or put it in the chat. And you don't have to agree with it necessarily, but why do you think Adam Fletcher and the Free Child Institute put 8 youth adult equity above a 7? I feel like when I was first starting as teaching, I was like, completely youth driven would be amazing. Teachers sitting there doing nothing, and the kids are in complete control of their own learning. Why do you think an 8 is above a 7 in the Free Child Institute's view?
I have one thought, which is it's easier for adults to sit back than it is for them to engage as equals with children.
Independent role, I see Mike adding. Any other thoughts on why 8 might be preferred? Partnership is better than independence. Interesting. Okay, it's easy to just listen and not really engage. So if it's completely youth driven, it could feel like it's sectioned off from what the organization's actually doing. It's not incorporated. Okay.
What about the part of supportive structures, safe, effective, sustainable structures? The adult helps facilitate structure in the conversation versus just a free-for-all.
Absolutely. And I see Mercedes adding, adults have expertise and resources also, and youth have expertise and resources. So that combination will lead to better outcomes. And Cheryl kind of echoes that. More diversity of ideas, experienced, mixed with a new view. Equity, ultimate level playing field, similar risks and rewards. Youth are able to recognize their voices as having equal weight with that of an adult. This was great. Yes, I think that's why they put 8 above 7 too. The way that we frame it is one of our goals with Changemakers is that youth are active participants in communal life and civic life. And if all of youth leadership was in completely youth-driven spaces, well, that's not what community looks like. So how can we bring youth into partnership effectively with adults so that they are genuinely involved in civic and communal processes? That's very important to us. In the same breath, I want to reiterate that 8 isn't always better than 7. And during our after school program, we ask coaches for this particular activity, not even an entire session, for this particular activity, do you want to be at a 7 or an 8? Or for this group of things, would it be better to be at a 6 where you're taking specific roles and youth are taking specific roles? Or you might get to a certain point where a 5 is going to be most appropriate. So it's really not the case that any one session would live at one number the whole time, and even less likely that an entire program would live at one number the entire time. And then the last complication before I go to the activity, the reason I'm framing it so much is we're going to try to score different scenarios, and it's an impossible process, but I think it's helpful in working with the tool. The other thing is that at any given moment, one student might feel like they're at a 7 and another student might feel like they're at a 2 or a 3. So at any given moment, there isn't a clear thing. For every individual student, there's not a clear number. And for every program, there's not a clear number. With that being said, let's try to choose numbers for programs. So the reason we do this activity is not to find a right answer. So if you were the straight A student that's going to get frustrated, just let it go now. We're going to throw out a kind of our first gut reactions when hearing vague descriptions of programs. And the goal is really to engage with this document and kind of see for yourself like, oh, this is making me think of the best thing that this activity can do is it's going to make you say, oh, this is an area where we could ratchet up the youth power. or, oh, wow, this program is different from this one in how it's doing this. So the actual right answer is not going to be as important. I just want to frame that.
And Jake, I want to let you know, Andrew figured out how to get the PDF in the chat, and Karen McCannell found it on the website, so people can access it now through the chat.
Thank you. That's actually very great news. So you're going to need that. You're going to need that graphic. I'm going to bring up our slides again. And can somebody volunteer to unmute themselves and read this first example?
In this program, the mayor's office in a small city has a youth council that is responsible for one project per year. The youth council decides on a topic on their own, sets a vision, researches the topic, and presents it to the mayor at the end of the year. During their after-school meetings, youth are supported by adults in the community who care about their chosen project. After their pitch to the mayor decides if and how the advice will take effect.
So thank you for that. Clearly, this program would occupy multiple numbers at different times, but for you, for your first reaction, looking at your ladder of youth voice, put in the chat what number you think this program primarily lives in. What number from 1 to 8 do you think that this program primarily accesses? Seeing 5s and 6s early. Get a few more. Awesome. Can someone who scored it a 5, and we can keep letting the numbers pour in, can somebody who scored it a 5 unmute themselves and explain why they felt that it was out of 5?
The ultimate decision-making authority rested with the mayor versus the youth group for the action and implementation.
Thank you. How about somebody who rated it a 6? Why did you pick 6?
This is Ross. I picked 6, but now that I read it again, I do think 5 would be my answer. They were more, the youth had more control, but I wouldn't say there was equality. So I'm not the best person to answer for number 6.
Well, fair enough. Well, I don't want you to shy away from the high scores either, because I could definitely see in this program, youth are deciding on the topic, they're setting their own vision, they're researching the topic. So in terms of being stewards of their own learning, they're probably living at a 7 or 8 most of the time. But yeah, when it comes to pitching with the mayor, I think that's what a lot of people reacted to. They kind of, at that point, it's up to adults whether they adopt it or not, and they're positioned more as consultants. So I'd say for a program like this, youth may have an extremely, extremely positive experience about it. I think it would be important to frame for students what the ending would look like, because if they're working towards something that they believe they have power on, and then at the end they find out that they were being positioned as a consultant, I could see a lot of disappointment on the part of the youth. So it's not bad to position youth as consultants, but make sure you're clear on where the power is and when it's there. Let's try another one. Can somebody unmute themselves and read this one?
In this after-school program, there's a youth advisory board where youth can give advice to the staff and adult board. Adults make all of the final decisions. With the advice of the youth advisory board, adult staff create the vision, set goals, raise money, and hire or fire employees. Adults lead the after-school meetings and work alongside youth to organize activities and events.
Thank you. If we can put in the chat, what do we think, where do we think this program is living, the Youth Advisory Board in particular? I see 3s and 4s. Can I have someone who scored it a 4 share why they scored it a 4?
Jake, I was just looking at the chart, and in that reward, it said young people may influence adult decisions or activities, and it felt like that was the crux of what was happening when I saw that.
Mm-hmm. How about for someone who scored it a 3?
I felt like they were taking information from the youth, but then after that, it's really up to the adults to do everything else, and maybe they're having youth work alongside them to try to get other youth involved or something. But I've kind of felt like they were just getting ideas from them, and that was about it.
Yeah, and I wanted to point out about this example. This is probably a very common example where there's programs that are towing the line between a 3 or a 4, and it might be in the way that adults are engaging with that input that would make a student feel more like they're an advisor or consultant versus a token or decoration to maybe a decision that was already made and people are looping in youth to just validate it or something like that. Any thoughts on this one before we go to our final example?
I just thought this one was an interesting one because I feel like I see this one pop up in lots of different other type of ways in which we try to engage different groups of people. It's like the idea of, well, we're hearing their opinion, but in the reality, it's everything that we decide and set goals and set vision is all still done without that group of people. So I thought this was a good example to pull in.
Yeah, thank you for that. And it is, it does feel like sometimes, yeah, youth can be brought in to validate decisions that have already been made. And it's important to know what are your systems for getting youth feedback too, because in school, a lot of times students are conditioned to kind of provide the answer that adults are looking for. So that can happen where you think you have an advisory board and really what you're running is kind of like a classroom environment where students feel like they need to be providing a certain answer. You're not really getting their authentic advice. Let's go to our final example before opening up to Q&A. Can we get someone to read this final one?
In this summer camp, the Board of Advisors or leadership team is made up of both youth staff and adult staff. Both adults and youth get to vote on decisions. The board makes the major decisions in planning for the project, like the goals of the year or the research topic. They also evaluate how the program is going. Youth staff supervise and mentor new youth members who make smaller decisions. Youth staff are in charge of small projects and have to report back to the leadership team. With the support of the youth staff, adults create daily activities to meet decided goals, raise money, and report back.
Okay, can we thank you for reading that. That was a big one. Can we get as many scores in the chat? To make sure we have enough time for Q&A, I'm going to ask, can somebody who scored this a 6 share why they felt like it was at a 6?
So Jake, I scored it a 6, and I thought it was because they both made up the leadership team, and they were both separately in charge of different things, but they each had responsibilities.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that it looks like youth are even put into leadership positions in different places, like the youth, they're supervising and things like that. So they definitely split some leadership skills and responsibilities.
And I think for this example, it's probably a thin line between a 6 and an 8 at times, and maybe even a 7 after the responsibilities have been split. But I can imagine a lot of really collaborative spaces on that board of advisors in making the decisions. And then I think a lot of people captured that kind of, yeah, it does sound like there's certain things that are entirely in the adult bucket and certain things that are entirely in the youth bucket. So I definitely see that as well. With that, I'm going to stop my screen share, and we will open it up for any questions that you may have this morning.
So Jake, Karen Kiley pointed out that the same sort of ladder could be considered in kind of your partnership with other communities, including adult communities. Is this same sort of ladder available and looking at other kinds of community engagement?
That's a really good question. I don't know about a ladder to that amount of detail, but this ladder is kind of a more detailed version of a more general one that is it's called we can pull that up. Andrew, would you be able to pull up the citizen power progression?
Yeah, I'm working on it right now.
Awesome. So Andrew and I were both trained at the Asset-Based Community Development Institute in Chicago, and they use tools very similar to this to talk about adult communities and stakeholders as well. So as soon as we get that in the chat, we can have everybody take a look at that as well.
Okay. Andrew put it in the chat. That's great. So, and please, if other people have questions, feel free to jump in. But I actually have an interesting question for Jake and Andrew. So from the beginning of your work, founding Tulsa Changemakers to today, what has changed about your approach to this work? What's become more important or less important, or that you had a complete flip on? And maybe both of you could answer it.
I think the biggest thing is that we've brought more people into the fold. So when we were first starting Changemakers, I think me and Jake had this vision of keeping it really, really small and really focusing on just a small number of students, and me and Jake as the facilitators. And as we learned more and had more experience, we decided to bring in more educators into the fold and pilot a model of the program where we were training other educators to do the after school program and bring in students from their school sites. And that has catapulted our effectiveness across the board. Just the more we bring in new educators and new young people, the more we learn, the more effective the curriculum and the after school program and our delivery and our ability to coach and understand concepts, it is improved. And so I think certainly some programs should stay small and stay with a small number of people. But in our case, I think we've learned over time that the quality of the work that we do has improved as an organization by bringing in more people. And then the people that we do bring in, they have those small experiences that are super deep with the young people that they're working with, but it didn't need to be something that just me and Jake had control over.
And I think for the youth adult work in particular, and I think this was kind of a slow change over time, but I think it was a point early where we felt like if it wasn't at a 7 or 8, it wasn't worth doing. And we feel like there's a lot of instances where youth as consultant and youth as advisors are important. And I think less important is the number that you're at. Unless 1, 2, and 3, I don't think there's any place for. It's a waste of time. It's not developmentally appropriate for students. But anything above a 3, there's a place and time for it. And less important is the number you're at than the number that you're at is chosen and intentional. and being very clear that as long as what you're doing is intentional and you can speak to the decisions you're making and they're rooted in sound decision making, then it's a youth adult partnership worth pursuing.
I love that idea of being intentional about choosing your level of engagement. For those of us who have young people in our lives, what's the number one area that they wish they were more engaged, as opposed to, you know, just being told how it's going to be? Like, when you hear from youth, what do they really wish they were more engaged in?
That's a question for, so what for us, I think the most, I mean, at its baseline, youth want to be doing stuff, and they want to see outcomes of their work. So I think when you have a program that is only, if it's an entire if it's a moment can be at a 4 or 5. But if you have an entire program that, you know, once a month youth are coming together to advise and then going home and never really seeing the outcomes, then I think you're going to get disengagement pretty early. So, I mean, youth want to be engaged in the project. They want to be contributing, and they want to see the outcomes of it. And then in terms of particular topics, in the listening campaigns of the after school program, I have a feeling that we would generate a similar list of things than what the students are generating. Right now, they're thinking a lot about diversity, equity, inclusion, mental health awareness and access to resources, environmental concerns, and then this year, a lot of things about personal hygiene and COVID and safety.
And I was seeing in the chat, I think this will add on to it. The other topic that has been huge has been homelessness, especially this year. But I'll share an example of a project that I really appreciated, and I think illustrates the I don't know, the power of the after school program. So one of my favorites is from Hale High School, fall 2018. They listened to themselves. They did some one-on-one interviews in the community, and the topic they identified was school safety. And they originally thought, based on really their own experiences, they thought it was going to be physical school safety, that people felt physically unsafe at school. But when they did more learning and listening at their school site, particularly through their survey, students said, we actually feel physically safe at school. We just don't always feel as emotionally safe. And our lack of emotional safety is tied to not feeling like our cultural identities are being affirmed or celebrated. And so they came up with this idea of a cultural diversity night, where they could intentionally highlight the different cultures that are represented at their school. So they ended up bringing together over 100 students from their school. They got tons of donations from local businesses, from different types of foods and beverages. They had different students and organizations come in to do different cultural dance performances. And the event was a huge success. They ended up raising $500 at pitch night to do the event bigger and better the next semester. Their principal was asking them, Dr. Riley, who's an LT alum, was asking them, you got to do this again. So they did it again in that spring. And then they were going to do it again last year, but then COVID hit and sort of blocked that from happening. But the reason why I love that project is because I think it illustrates the power of listening, that they had one idea about where they were going to go. And when they really listened to their community, they were able to save time from doing something that still would have been valuable, but instead focused on a type of safety that was even more important to their community. And then two, I think it illustrates a project that continue after the Changemakers direct engagement in the program, because it really is a semester-long program. And our idea, the goal is to build capacity in the Changemakers and a leadership identity and a leadership story, so they feel comfortable driving impact without direct involvement in the program. But this is an example of a cohort that was just really onto something and really had a powerful teamwork and wanted to continue with that impact.
I remember that project. It was super impactful. So as we're wrapping up our session, remind us where we can find your pitch nights. And then if I remember correctly, if they're on Facebook this year, that means they live after the fact. So we can actually go and watch them anytime. But tell us when they're going to happen and where we find them.
Yes, so our next two pitch nights are on Tuesday, May 25th and Wednesday, May 26th at 5:30 p.m. They're all on Facebook Live on the Changemakers Facebook page. I just put in the chat box the event page, so you can just click on that now, click going, you'll get reminders, but we'd love to see you.
Thank you. Thank you for being here with us today and reminding us that we can have a role in making more effective youth-adult engagement. And I want to invite everyone back. June 4th will be our next One Gas Fireside Chat on Zoom. And we're going to be inviting individuals from the Tulsa Housing Authority to give us an update on their River West development just across the river in the West Tulsa area. So thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend and a beautiful Mother's Day. And we'll see you all next month. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.